Now it's really 6 o'clock. I'd like to call tonight's joint meeting between the towns of Canandaigua and Bristol to order. We'll begin tonight's meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Jean, could you call the roll, please?
Absolutely. Councilwoman Karen DeMay. Understand she's necessarily absent.
Yes.
Councilman Terry Fenway.
Present.
Councilwoman Adeline Luda. Present. Supervisor Jared Simpson.
Present.
Councilwoman Lauren Belanda. Present. Supervisor Robert Green.
Present.
Councilman Christopher Hart.
Present.
Councilman Frederick Stressing.
Present.
Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. And can you confirm that the meeting is properly advertised?
Yes, it was.
All right. We do have privilege of the floor at this time. Is there anyone who would like to be heard? In the audience or on the screen? All right, seeing no hands, we'll move to our priority business, which is the annual meeting for the Canandaigua-Bristol Water District. And I'll open the floor to any thoughts or discussions. We need to talk about the agreement, any other thoughts or ideas that we have going forward.
Supervisor, maybe a place we can start is just kind of give a real 30,000-foot overview of the budget that we both have recently entertained. Yep. And then Jim can talk a little bit about the financial or the water needs and that sort of stuff. So we'll come back to the slide that's on the screen because that's actually before I do that, I'm sorry, let me just share the screen so that Tim and everybody can also see. So let me share screen one. Okay. As you know, we've just recently, both municipalities have adopted the budget. There was a tax rate increase in the Canandaigua-Bristol Water District, and I'm just going to show you the Excel spreadsheet because it's a quick, easy way to look at it, all of the years going back and kind of where we've come. The Canandaigua-Bristol Water District is unique in that it has both a ad valorem, a tax levy, as well as a per unit charge levy. And that is the same for residents of both the town of Canandaigua as well as the town of Bristol, in that it is $187 per unit for the unit charge for the cost of the district, as well as the tax rates or the ad valorem charge is 69 cents per $1,000 of assessed value for each resident or both residents in each municipality. The town of Canandaigua has 94 units. The town of Bristol has 232 units. So the budget for this water district for 23 is $83,000. And a lot of that relates to the ongoing expenses for the operation of the district, as well as the debt service. You can see up here, the revenue side, the special assessment for Bristol is $43,000. The special assessment for the town of Canandaigua portion is $17,000. That's based on that per unit charge. And the debt service principal is $20,000 a year, and the interest is $37,000 a year for $57,000 essentially in financing costs. We've got $20,000 coming up this year in contractual expenses. As expenses continue for the improvements that we need to make relative to the day road tank, and that's some of the stuff that Jim and Greg will talk to you about that. So can I answer any questions on the finance side of things? So any questions? That was real fast. Yes, sir.
Just for clarification for particularly my town board here, how those units describe what a unit is. I know when we first started discussing this a number of years ago, it was confusing to me how that was delegated, what units meant.
On your benefit basis side of your budget, a unit is 1 or 3. A 3 being it's a piece of a parcel with a home on it that's occupied, and 1 is a vacant piece of parcel. So that's how it's determined, a 1 or a 3. So if you have a 3, if you have a house in the water district, you pay 3 of the $3.
187.
187 times 3.
Right.
Okay, so that would be each unit is $187 times 3.
So just looking at the screen just down here, I know it's hard for some of you to see because it's not blown up, but here, grab the mic here. So the average home in the town of Bristol is assessed for $125,000, and you can see they pay $647, and that's up $16 from 2022. And in the town of Canandaigua, the average home is assessed, what does that say, 179, 173? And it's $680. So that's a $22 increase for the average home in the town of Bristol, or town of Canandaigua, I'm sorry. So each residents of both Canandaigua and Bristol pay that $178 per unit charge, as well as that 69-cent tax levy charge. And again, as Jim was saying, so if it's a developed parcel, it's 187 times 3. If it's a vacant parcel, it's just 187. Plus, in both of those cases, the 69 cents per thousand.
Do you know how many 3s and 1s there are?
The
do.
assessor does that list together for us each year.
Each year at budget time, I asked the assessors of both Canandaigua and Bristol for a list, and there's an Excel spreadsheet that actually has every single tax map number.
50, is it 50-50?
No,
No,
it's 232 to 94. It's substantially
How
more.
much
for
of
the
those 232s are 3s?
without looking at that,
We'd have to look at the.
that spreadsheet to
Yeah.
give you an estimate that I'd be comfortable telling you which right or wrong right now.
That's actually filed with the budget with Ontario.
It is.
That
Mhm.
spreadsheet. Yep,
Yep.
so it's on our website. If you go to the town board tab, you can actually look at that spreadsheet.
Okay.
So this also, this bond was for 37 years. So we still have another 17 years, I think, it has to be paid on this
Right.
bond. Okay, so it was done back in 2006. And well, district was, Volker was then the Senate,
7.
and he provided a check to the town of Bristol on behalf of the Canandaigua-Bristol Water District for a little over $1 million
Mhm.
to help offset the cost to bring this down to where it was within audit and control of, say, $950 a year, the cost of the interest, principal, water, whatever. So,
You can also see here over the course of the last 10 years almost, the tax rate has remained relatively flat. This is a jump this year from last year, 56 cents to 69 cents. And that's in part because of these ongoing expenses with this water tank and the THM problem that we need to talk to you about. But the future improvements, one of the things, Canandaigua Town Board's heard me say this 100 different times. We want to avoid a roller coaster. We want to be as much like a choo-choo train as possible, right? With the tax rate and keeping it nice and flat. And yes, there's going to be hills you got to climb. And that's kind of what we're doing here. We're starting to climb knowing that there's going to be increase so you don't end up with a roller coaster.
any questions on that?
The other thing I'll just point out while I'm right here, so this red number here, the $7,483, this is the unassigned fund balance for the Canandaigua-Bristol Water District. So that currently is below what we have our fund balance policy set at, which calls for the fund balance not to drop below $14,000. This is below that, obviously, with a $10,000 appropriation to the 2023 budget to balance off the budget, $10,068, in order to try to keep that tax rate from even going higher. This is a difficult district because you don't have a lot of assessed value. You've got 11.8 million in the town of Bristol, and you've got 6.3 million in the town of Canandaigua. So that's pretty small for a special district. And so that's why any little jump impacts that tax rate pretty significantly.
I'll just add that this year, that number going up to 69 cents was because we had to replace the altitude valve and anti-cavitation valve in the road tank, which was worn out. When you talk $5,000–7,000, doesn't sound like much, but with this small district, it's a lot. It's hard to every little bit, like 1 or 2 cents, people tend to get upset with. But on the other hand, they have to have safe drinking water. So, you know, why did it jump up that much? Like, why did it go up 13 cents? Well, it went up 13 cents because we had to fix the altitude anti-cavitation valve and install animal rounds in the tank.
Right. Yeah, the difference there, I
Just have to scroll up.
line, and we watched that very closely. I mean, Jim and I were going back and forth. Jim's like, Doug, I got to replace it. And I'm like, Jim, there's no money. And he's like, I got to replace it. And so we're like going back and forth, back and forth. But that increase from 56 cents to 69 cents, you can see it right here. Canandaigua tax levy increased from 35.82 to 44.14, and Bristol's increased from 65.76 to 82.10. It's less than $3,000 in total increase resulted in that tax rate increase. That's which was the cost of the anti-rods.
So,
That's the first time they were replaced.
yes, first time. Well, we've rebuilt them, they just worn out. They used to make things with lead a little bit stronger, so things don't last like they used to. When everything's now just brass, it wears out quicker, so. I'm not saying that's good, I'm just saying back when they had lead back in the day, and some of the brass parts that lasted a bit longer than what they do today, so. As we're discussing cost, Greg will tell you also mention here. You've probably received letters that I've sent to Bob in correspondence about our THM levels being above the level of 80. And they continue to be above 80 even when we flush a few million gallons a year. We normally bill for about 5 million gallons and you get charged for about 8 million gallons. So that's what our water rate is a little bit higher than everybody else's. Because we have to put so much water out in the ground to try to keep the THM levels. I'm trying to keep them below 90, or I'm trying to be, even though I'm in violation. Because what I'm trying to do is, the only thing to do other than flushing is to apply for a grant, which we've been doing for about a year now, to install a, like a better term, an aeration system that's going to aerate the tank with a mixture at the bottom. As the bubbles are created, it creates a friction, and as they rise to the top, they pop, and there's a fan that will evacuate the bad stuff, I call the THMs, out of the air to lower them. Then we would use that particularly between April and November to keep the rate of THMs down. Winter time is not a problem because the sun's not beating up the tank. It's not hot. It's the summertime that hurts us the most.
Jim, you said a couple of years from a grant. Let's just explain that for a second. So it's a multi-step. That's why it's multiple years. What Jim is talking about, this last final step, and Greg can jump in here, but this last final step is applying for the grant to actually do the work. But before we could do the work, we had to engineer everything. And I just showed you the impact of $3,000. And obviously engineering is going to be a lot more than $3,000. So before we could even do that, we had to apply for a grant for the preliminary engineering study, which we got and received, which is the $18,000 you guys signed for us today. It was total of $24,000. So it's been a multi-step process. We had to apply for a grant to do the engineering work. We got the grant. We were able to do the engineering work. Now we're applying for a grant to actually do the work.
The work itself, you know, between 2 and 50,000.
Greg, were you starting to say something?
Yeah, sorry, I was gonna jump in. Yeah, I apologize for not being there, but there is in the back of the PER, there is at the end of that report, there's a proposed schedule that kind of outlines the next steps for this project, and then it also talks about looking for funding through a couple different organizations. So one of the ones that might be promising for this, just because of the numerous violations that have kind of piled up on this tank, and also relating to disinfection byproducts, is actually a WIA grant. Not that we're necessarily replacing anything, which is typically what that grant is for, but They have been focusing on water quality as one of their key parameters. The WIA grants, the application is due in the summer, later summer of each year, and then the awards come out usually, around December, but I think this year they actually came out early November. So that's a promising avenue to look at. We have taken this to RD. RD basically told us that our project is a little too small for them to look at any type of grant funding for it, but we might be able to still get financing through them. And then obviously the other location is the state revolving fund, the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So we've already listed this project on the IUP. We'll have to do it again next year if we decide to move ahead with a WIA application. The WIA application, the WIA grant could potentially pay for up to 60% of the program costs. But those grants are highly competitive. And this last round actually went to primarily communities that had public health issues and violations and consent orders. So this probably would be a decent project to put in. I'm not going to tell anybody that it's a slam dunk, but it is probably a strong candidate for a WIA grant. Did I jump ahead there, Doug, too much?
No, that's fine. A little bit. We'll come back to part of that. But what Greg is talking about is that actually getting the work done and the financing for that, we've got to look under every rock, just because, as we're just showing you, I mean, there's not a lot of money in this district with $7,000 and a $250,000 bill approximately to do the improvements. We've got to look under every single rock. In 2017, the town of Canandaigua, Terry Finelli led an effort with Jim and Greg to do a water master plan, a hydraulic analysis of the entire town of Canandaigua, and included part of this, the Canandaigua-Bristol Water District. So a portion of it's kind of mapped out. That's what you see here on the screen in terms of future envisionment areas, as well as the existing water lines and kind of some improvements there. But Jim, do you just kind of want to talk through a little bit here of the, you might need to grab that mic just so they can hear you, because we're far away from the mic up here.
How many of you are familiar with Day Road, the water tank? The board members here, you are. Okay. So on top of Day Road, the water is pumped from Gooddale Road. And from that mark right about there in Cheshire, and it's pushed up and over a hill in front of Bob Green's house to a pressure reducing vault that then goes down south on 32 up to Day Road. And from there, it's stored for fire protection and for rechlorination of the water before it leaves back to the town of Bristol down the hill onto 64 and parts of County Road 32. It goes as far as the library on 32, and as far north as the fire department, and down to Parsons, Oregon, is the district as it's roughly laid out there.
What is that pink blotch at the end of Case Road?
I wondered that too. I think that's an error.
Between those two.
I saw that. I'm like, that is not part of the district. So unfortunately, there's no water there. Okay.
There's plenty of water.
In this district, there's a 12-inch water main on State Route 64 and an 8-inch water main on 32. That's what feeds the town of Bristol. That there isn't a lot of use down here. One thing I will say that has helped this year is your hemp farm used a lot of water this year. So that actually was a plus. We have to flush as much, but at that end of the town, because they use several 100,000 gallons of water. That helps. But overall, the district needs to be flushed about every 6 to 8 weeks year round, just to try and keep the THM levels down. And that's just due to the fact that there's 3 dead ends and not a lot of usage out of that tank.
So because the hemp farm is mostly summer, fall, then come winter time, their usefulness dies out.
It does, but the winter time doesn't concern me as much as the summertime
Because of the heat.
because of the heat, okay? That's typically when, August is typically our third quarter is our worst quarter. It runs on a running average. So you take the 4 quarters and then average it out. That's how we end up usually over the limit we could be at THMs.
Where do those THMs come from? The lining of the?
No, actually, it starts with the lake. When it comes in from the lake, the total organics are already dissolved in the water. And from there, the city is working on improving the filtration and settling of the total organics. They're trying to lower those before they get out of the plant. So they come in at right around 30. They leave the city's water treatment plant at around 60 currently. So by the time it gets, we pump it up and over the hill and into the system, it takes a while for it to get over the hill because of the lack of use in the town of Bristol. So as chlorine reacts with the organics, that's where you start to get your THM levels. It creates the secondary byproducts of the THMs in the water. You'd have to drink millions of gallons of water every year to probably ever be ill, but it's just one of those things where the EPA is very critical, not only of that, but of PFOAs and PFOS that we're now testing for, and also lead and asbestos. So ever since Flint came along, it was, they put the restrictions, or I should say the levels of maximum containment levels very, very low. So it's more of a warning sign, like an alarm going off, like, hey, your system has some trouble, start looking into it now versus it's really in trouble and people are getting sick. That's how I try to phrase it with the EPA. Okay, so currently the least expensive way to deal with THMs is to flush. Everybody has to flush, not just Bristol, but Hopewell, Canandaigua, Farmington, Village of Manchester, City of Canandaigua. We all have to flush in order to keep the levels down. We're hoping that in a couple of years that we'll have a better filtration system to remove more of these from the lake. But until then.
Do you think it's fair to say though, this district in particular gets flushed more than?
Oh, yes. Yeah. You have 3 dead ends and not a lot of usage. What I mean by a lot of usage, you might use 60,000 gallons a day. You know, we're moving around 1.5 million gallons a day. It's just a lot of small homes and no business. So it's not like it's a bad thing. It's just not a lot of usage.
So you say it's the least expensive solution, right? Why not the least expensive solution?
Well, because it costs money to produce it. And it costs money to send guys out to flush hydrants. And it costs money to drive that vehicle around. The more we dump in the ground, the more energy it takes to pump it over the hill.
So the total overhead.
The overheads, yeah. And, to pull water out of the lake just to dump on the ground is not really,
Goes right back.
But it's clean water.
It's clean water, yeah, it's clean water, but the economics of constantly doing it is not, last year, like I said earlier, I think we billed Bristol 5 million and we pumped 8.5 million over, but we had to put roughly 4 million on the ground just to stay in compliance or close to compliance as we could.
Jim, do you know when they put it in? I mean, it was the thought when it was initially put in that we were trying to encourage growth in that area?
There was discussion of it going to Bristol Mountain at one time, way back when, but I think the cost was a bit more than people foreseen. And I don't know what the thought of going north would have been at that time. You cannot go much farther than, is it Mud Creek that goes there? Is that Mud Creek? Then Mud Creek, because everything goes back uphill and you have to pump. So you're kind of committed to Route 64 and some of the spurs off it at certain elevations if you chose to go farther south or north. Any questions on that? Okay. if you have any questions, ma'am.
I'm just thinking, so if we expand the water district, does that help the problem at all?
Probably not. I'll be honest with you. I mean,
Yeah,
you
probably
still
not,
got dead end water mains. I
Right.
mean, once the aeration system was installed, yes, it would definitely help. Okay. The people who are in the current district would like to see it expanded, it'd be a little less taxes for them. So, but no, and I'm not sure how much of a feel there is for expansion. Bob and I have had many conversations with the residents, as some of the board members here have been involved with, and doesn't really seem to be a big demand for it in certain areas. So
I think, Jim, one of the things, and just not to make it a long conversation, but for our board members to understand and the community to understand, laying a water line isn't just pull an excavator, put some plastic in the ground.
correct.
The process here between the state, yourselves, and the density, and then there's that formula for average income, and there's a cap that the state puts on. You can't go over this cap. Let's say hypothetically, we could establish, we want to go ahead with another district, and there was enough people there to want that district, we'd have to lay that all out to them. And we'd be looking at 2 to 3 years out, possibly, before you could start.
Yeah, possibly. And I would encourage you and the board then to also look at RD money, because your population is less than 10,000, and there could be funding there for that. We no longer are able to do that like we used to do. So, or there could be other grants out there to help offset cost. But either way, I think, Craig, what's the current audit threshold for the state?
Yeah, give me a second to look that up. I don't know what, I haven't
Okay.
looked at the
I
2023
think it's,
rate.
I want to say 950.
What does that mean? So is that?
What that means is if a water district was created, the state has a level where a threshold of say $950 a year. That includes your interest, your principal, your O&M, and your water usage. If it costs more than that, then it has to go to the state to be reviewed to see if the district can afford it.
Okay.
And that's a whole nother long-term cost. So
Jim mentioned the 10,000 population. Some of you might remember, like the preliminary engineering report that we just did. In that particular case, we've worked with MRB and the town of Canandaigua and town of Bristol, but the town of Bristol was actually the applicant of the grant on behalf of the district, because the town of Canandaigua doesn't qualify for it because of our population. So there are certain things where we need you guys to make the application on behalf of the district to kind of work collaboratively together. And we try to be helpful, but you know, that's an example of one that we just recently did with that. Yes.
Not sure if you got my text there, but it's the audit control threshold for water in 2022 is $989 per year.
thanks, Brad.
If the actual average came in, and it was, and I think you and I discussed this at length. When it came in, when we looked at it, the County Road 32 extension was around $1,800 a year.
Yeah, it was in that area of 1,800, if I remember correctly, Bob, we talked about last time, without any outside funding agency to help offset the cost.
Are you going north on 32 or?
Yes,
Okay.
north, because we're going south on 32.
On 32, yeah, we were talking about closing that loop, remember?
Right,
But the distance between the homes was,
we're going from roughly Fisher Hill Road back to Montana Road.
it was pretty significant.
Correct.
Does anybody have any other questions about where we are currently? Because I know there are a couple of items that we do need to discuss. We need to, you know, kind of talked around the idea of what we're gonna go next and see if there's consensus, if that's their best plan. On the back of the agenda, there are a couple items on there. of the agenda, but the intermunicipal agreement. There are a couple down here. I know there has been discussion. I know that you had received, Supervisor, some discussion from, I know one that we were looped in on was that you were, and some others, the whole idea of what is a parcel. That discussion for the district and also out of district users. Because you have people out of district who would like to use, I think those are a couple other topics that we can discuss and see where we are on those. Because we'd have to come up with some sort of consensus on that. So I'll let everybody kind of read that email dated March 2nd.
I believe that there are 3 out-of-district users currently in the town of Bristol, I think. Is that correct?
Blue Cross, 2 on County Road 32, and then we had one that was somehow back when this was all agreed to. On Montana Road.
Right.
That did not get included. They pay the quarterly, but they haven't paid tax.
Right.
Yeah.
And it goes back 2006, and we stumbled on it.
So why that's important, let me just show you guys. So here's, this is very 30,000 foot, but the purple area, right? That's the district in both the town of Canandaigua. This is town of Canandaigua portion. This is the town of Bristol portion, right? And so an out of district user means it's a parcel. I'm just going to hypothetically pick a spot here, right? That is not in the purple area. So it's out of district, meaning that there are no provisions to tax those folks for receiving water. So they're not contributing, their assessed value is not in these numbers, either in the town of Canandaigua or town of Bristol, and they're not contributing to the benefit that they are receiving.
They're currently getting water.
And they
already?
currently are getting water.
Those are the,
So
those are 3.
of them, right? So they're not, and we cannot include them in the district because they're out of district. There's no way to expand the district really per se. So that's where this out of district user fee, right? So I know that Jim, in an effort to try to make it whole through his authority as the administrator for the operations of all of our water districts, including Canandaigua-Bristol, there's a charge that's currently being assessed through their water bill. But officially, to make it clean and everything, we should have something in the agreement that says out of district users are going to do X, whatever X is, and then we can bill them outside of the tax levy, and they would be billed through their water bills.
So Jim, what are they being billed right now?
I don't know the exact amount, Jared, but what I've done is I've taken this year's O&M and the interest principal at their assessed rate of assessment and divided by 4, and it goes on their bill.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's as fair, it's as close as we
It's
can
as
get it
close as I
without
can get.
absorbing them.
And lease, and then from there it gets brought in, and then Keith records it as a receivable to go towards the Bristol County District.
Is that a tenable route going forward to have a formula for that? Because I know on here you had mentioned, Doug, you'd mentioned like a 5-unit charge or some flat rate. Which is more tenable, that or create a formula based on their current assessed value applied to the rate of tax for the district as it exists?
I think that my personal opinion is there should be an additional cost to that user because they're creating
More work.
additional admin work
Right.
for the district.
So-
Okay, so
And that property did not pay any of the debt to get the water to
Right,
it, right?
Right, so, and they're getting, and we don't want them to have an extra benefit that everybody else is subsidizing for them. So if we can establish it that we can figure a formula for their fee plus whatever other surcharge would be on top of that, what would be a fair surcharge?
Well, I thought, didn't you previously meet with maybe even a former supervisor to kind of figure out, I thought that's where the original, where that thing
We
came
went
like
through-
5 times 5 units or whatever it was.
I don't recall the units position on that,
Okay.
but we had the 2 people across the road
Yeah.
On 32. And then when we started going through this, we came up with another family. And again, it goes back to 2000. Whenever this was agreed to, it gotten overlooked at the time.
Right.
Uh,
Well, there
I
is,
think we've got to look at, I think we've got to look at what the formula is, what you folks come up with. Obviously, this is beyond our expertise. You're the administrator. My question to you is, would it be on their tax bill at the end of the year, or would it be on a quarterly basis?
It's on a quarterly basis.
I have had conversation with the family that was left out of all of this. They understood, I explained it to them, I walked them through this. And yes, you've been paying a quarterly bill, but you haven't been receiving O&M or any of those. So when I spoke to them, they were okay with that. They understood. That's what I think. Just as long as we come up with something that's fair and equitable, which I know you will.
And then something that can be administered going forward
Yeah.
to any that we might add in there.
The only thing about tying it to the unit charge is both boards are adopting the unit charge every single year. That's
That
$187.
Right, but what if it was your like you have an extra, I mean, just the number here, you have an extra 5-unit charge annually for
developed.
being an out of district user, or you have an extra, say your unit charge would be a 3, you're an 8, or a 3, you're a 6, or if you're a 1, you'd be a 4.
Right, you guys could come up with whatever, right?
Something
Yeah.
like that. So they have their chart, they have their unit, whether they're a 1, 2, or 3. And then on top of that, they would have their additional levy, their additional assessment, their additional fee as an out of user fee for this.
So there's no initial agreement with any of these people where they're signing what they were, when they signed on. There's no agreement for what they plan to play going forward.
Actually, the town of Bristol did do a resolution this summer for
That was the
Two
most
new
recent.
two new
right?
ones. So we have to
Right.
get this last.
But
one
there was
signed.
nothing when they signed on. They just hooked up and started paying for what they were using.
Well, the property was in the district, but it wasn't owned by them, it was owned by a relative. And long story short, a long time ago, we did sell it, water net.
Well, you're talking about the original one, but there's no paperwork at all on it.
Yeah,
That's
there's
your
nothing.
That's, okay,
Then
that's,
there were 2 additional residents that we passed resolutions as
This year.
town board.
That was
Right.
recent, yeah.
And town of Canandaigua was supposed to come up with what they were going to be.
The wording, right?
Yeah.
Which for this year, we've just done simple, because we haven't completed the intermunicipal agreement, we just said, this is what you owe for a year, and I broke it up in 4 quarters, just to get the money coming.
When you have those figures, that is something, though we did as a board, okay, the additional out of user people. Do we have to then have another resolution accepting your rate, or is this just going based upon the original resolution?
Well, ideally, it would be in the agreement so that when this happens in the future, that
We
it
have
could
this to go
just
back to, we
fall
have
back to,
this
right?
for a fallback for every situation going forward. I mean, in the past, the 3 outliers will be outliers.
Right.
And those will get figured out and it'll,
Right.
they'll, the best of our ability, but going forward to have that in there so we can fall back on that saying, okay, if you want to add water, you're gonna pay the formula to figure out your assessed contribution plus an out of user fee of X number of units.
I have been looking at other municipalities and water authorities, there's different ones out there. I don't really have a good answer, I've just been researching what others do to come up with an idea, present to Doug, and then they'll bring it to the board and you guys can discuss it, so. 'Cause
But it's,
you might not like it, I'm just, there's different things out there.
but it's really whatever the 2 boards want to do. I
Right.
mean, it could be anything, whatever
it's
you
the-
think is fair. So
What's the feeling on doing it similar to how it has been with the assessed plus?
Yeah, there's a fee
Additional
involved
out of
every
unit
year of
fee
being out of
of-
district.
Yeah, you're assessed an extra
X.
X number of units. And that way it's tied to the unit rate, so it fluctuates and it keeps up with inflation as the unit rate might change.
how do you swear 20 years that somebody else paying
You don't,
their fee?
You can't, that's a wash.
that's a wash.
That's just It's water under the mud creek, I guess.
Thank you.
Right?
No, that's
Water
the
under-
THC level.
Water in the mud creek.
I think
Still
legally,
doesn't have a well.
I think you can legally go back 6 years. So,
Oh, yeah, we gotta move forward.
We met earlier this year, you, Doug, and I sat in on that meeting. At that time, it was, you had 1 and 3, the idea was 4 or 5. Out of district, usually.
Out of districts of 5.
Times whatever annual.
And what else?
Somewhere.
Right.
The simpler you can make it,
Yeah, the clearer it
the
is.
more
Right.
understandable it'll
But
be
if,
for.
what if an
No,
out of
2
district
across
user is
Canada.
a horse farm,
Third two is.
for example, and they're a 1,
Well, they'd be a 3 because
They
they're
go to a
developed.
3.
They'd be a 5.
They'd have a barn,
And then they would
sheds and
increase.
barns.
Out
are
of district, all out of district.
So whether it's a home or a farm
Out
or
of
a
district,
field
you're
or a hemp.
I think the
farm.
definition is either developed or non-developed.
Yes,
So
it has a
if-
5 and a 3 in the bottom.
If there's any,
Or
if a
not.
horse farm would be developed, it would be a 3, I believe. A vacant parcel would be the only thing that's a 1.
so that's one thing that both boards have to decide what is a vacant parcel, what isn't, because the Bristol assessor, she understands what we're saying, but people argue with her like, well, I only have a shed that I'm at for hunting for the weekends.
She's advocated having a 2, for example.
Right.
For precisely that, because it's not a house, it's not vacant, it's somewhere in between.
I don't think there is a 2.
I listened to the discussion
So
enough
it's either
times
a 1 or a 3.
across from
so-
my office, so I understand the argument.
And what Karen doesn't hear, I hear.
You know, but that's the questions.
And I
these are the
think we
questions that
should-
get asked in South Bristol.
In defense of the taxpayers though. Back in the day, back in the 1800s, early 1900s, people used to give away quarter acres or half acre plots. And if we have one of those, which we do, the guy's being assessed whatever his unit is for that, but he can't build on it, can't do anything with it, can't put it. He's stuck with this quarter acre of land, which the water line goes by. He's still paying on it, but he can't do anything with it.
Maybe that could be written into
Why can't he do anything?
like some sort of definition, like
Small.
a ordinance has an X amount of square feet
Oh,
to
yeah.
be considered a building lot.
Yeah, you can't build on it.
I'm getting at, it's like,
Buildable lot. so-
you can't, that's like Bill column 3, if he's only got 5,000 square feet, and you couldn't put a house on it. You might be able to put a barn to store his 4-wheeler, but. You know, that's a definition that could be written to define.
Yeah, that's something that could be done, that you guys, what
You
you
don't allow
guys could
building
do
on
to
quarter
protect
acre
those
lots?
people. No. That you guys,
ZBA, unless you went from the ZBA, the ZBA 's not
Yeah.
involved.
but you could write that in and say anything under X.
That would-
That's something I think
That
should
would
work
be
out.
helpful.
We don't have
Yes.
the definition, how big.
Right.
It has to be to build on.
So if it's not a
Not a
buildable lot,
buildable lot.
then
That's your answer.
to protect,
I
then
put
it's a 0.
myself, and this one gentleman inherited this, what's quarter.
Yeah.
He's like,
What do I do?
Right.
I get
what'd
it.
you like me to do with that?
That makes sense.
But are we calling so according to this, are we okay call, because I'm thinking about that whole, the hunter, the taxpayer, if somebody has a shed, that's a 3.
Well, you could
Currently,
maybe
it sounds-
add, the building has to have a CMO in order to be considered,
You know,
is it a temporary shed on skids that we moved, or is it
right,
permanent as a CMO?
What happens if the shed has water though?
Yeah.
Well, the shed has water.
Because it happens.
I think it's easier just to define it as if it has water or not. I mean, that's rather than the shape of the building or whatever the size, it's just whether or not it has water access.
If he has water, then he's getting a 3. Okay.
Access to water or?
if you have a faucet,
Has water.
if there is a faucet in the structure,
Even
If
if
he
it's a
paid
pump.
for a water meter to be installed,
A
he
water
has
meter,
water,
yeah,
then
fine.
he's-
Yes.
okay,
Right.
how's that?
You're onto something there though. If it's a water meter, if there's a water meter, maybe it's a 3. And
Yeah.
if there's not,
it's a 1.
That's
Because then if you've got somebody who has that quarter acre or that whatever, or somebody who just has a roughed-in hunting cabin
Or
that's
boat
sitting up
garage
there that has nothing hooked up to it.
Yeah.
They don't have a water meter, then that protects them.
But that is the question more, whether that person should be paying
anything, right?
at all.
So then you can decide, then that person could be a,
Well,
You know,
no,
and
see,
it's-
Well,
then-
that, no, that land, he could develop.
I was,
Then you open that up to the scenario where people have been paying for 20 years.
Yeah.
And the opportunity for larger grants.
yeah, no, you gotta leave it at 1 or 3. You can't,
Right?
don't,
yeah,
I would not deviate between the two.
Well, how much will that mess up the amount that's coming in though, if that's changing a lot of properties? Is that gonna
We-
mess up the balance sheet?
We have to look at that, right? So it won't affect 2023, but I think going forward,
If all of a sudden, instead of what, 320 some odd or 330 units, we have 400, well then truthfully, the 187 might be able to go down, but if we're at 200, then it's gonna have to go up because we still have to pay the debt service payment of the 57,000.
Really change it more than,
Mhm.
Well, are the units defined anywhere? I mean, what if somebody,
that's
I
what
know
we're
Bristol
doing.
doesn't want to hear
That's-
this, what if someone builds an apartment complex or something?
That's what we have to do is figure out,
When the state set up this, when the district was set up, it was set up by ad valorem, I'm sorry, benefit basis, so everybody, no matter what your assessment was equal.
Okay.
Okay, and the O and M was by ad valorem, but I don't think we can change that today without going through.
yeah, but what she's saying is if there's an apartment building, they have 1 meter and they're only paying 3-unit charge.
Well,
That should be defined.
then they're making out pretty good, Doug. I'll be honest with you, that's.
I mean, that's what I
are there currently
That's
any,
really-
are there currently any apartment buildings in the district?
doubtful in that.
No, there's
district.
not.
It's not unheard of. No, they just pay a lot more SS.
Are there some? are
There
there
might be some
duplexes,
multifamily.
Yeah, it's
multifamily?
not on on the, it's at the, like, 28 and 64, the one I can think of.
Right.
immediately.
Right,
That
so that's a
will-
good,
The
There's a-
cinder block place, used to
Yeah.
be cinder block.
It's got two houses, two apartments. right there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So then then that technically should be a 6.
it might
Well, I don't know, I'm not sure.
But-
Carson's, has
Oh, yeah,
rentals there.
I wasn't aware of that.
So the organs, they're in there,
Pardon me?
the organs. the
Yeah,
organ
they have
place.
3 apartments in that place.
And
So
they're
then
paying
that-
the same as the lady who has the shed,
Isn't
that's
that-
kind of weird.
It's not- it's not fair.
Yeah.
I mean, we can draft some wording, but I think what I'm hearing is if there's a water meter, 3 units, if there's not a water meter, 1 unit. Is that what everybody's collectively saying?
In district, yeah.
In the district, right? And then we have to talk about the other districts separately.
But I think it should be defined if it's a multi-family residence.
But if
somehow,
it's
too.
multifamily, it should be,
Should have more than 1 meter.
They don't necessarily.
Oh, boy, that gets really hard, because
Governing is hard.
it is hard, but is it even zoned as a multi-dwelling, or is it just, they just chopped it up and turned it into apartments and call it good?
That I know.
So,
The Wild West of Bristol.
it goes around here too a little bit. Maybe we start with the simple, and then we'll go from there. and
There you
see-
go.
and see what this
That's
does.
keep it- keep
See what
it
this does
simple.
to
Don't want any
Before we blow the
taxpayer
whole
equity,
house.
that's the only thing.
One is vacant,
Yes,
They cannot, no meter.
buildable.
Okay,
The
Because you're
lot
saying that
size
that
has to be buildable.
You're saying that one lot you're talking about is not buildable because it's too small.
so then what happens if they don't have a water meter and it's not a buildable lot?
Yeah, that's a question.
0.
well, then how many of
Still
those
in
are
the
like that?
district? We'd have to,
I think.
is everybody else gonna pay that?
Come on.
But
Well,
you're
he can't-
you're
that person
buildable
can't
and then
build
you're
there.
shed
Tell me
buildable,
this,
you know what I
if
mean? They
that
could still
lot
probably
then
build a
bought
shed.
Another
or
piece of
something like
property,
that,
they
but
get one lot.
Now it's buildable.
It's not a single family home.
You know where I'm going, it's
Yeah.
like if somebody bought the land next to him, you combined the two,
Yep.
then that person should know that they're gonna be charged.
I'm thinking of are from Bristol Center, going up Bristol Center Hill to the top. There's one on the west side of the road.
Oh, yeah, you talked, that's right.
I mean, the land is like this, the guy comes out once in a while, pitches a tent, calls it a day.
Right.
There's another one by the Historical Society. I'm not sure where that stands. There was a quarter of an acre in there. I almost think that was.
I think they tried to give it away, but they just let it
deed that
go
over
for
to the
taxes.
Historical Society, I think, just to get rid of it. It was-
Or they tried to. Anyway.
They tried to, I'm
So
not sure
now-
what it is.
I don't think there's a lot down the hill that burned down is still.
Oh, I don't think you can rebuild on that either. No.
On the corner?
Yeah.
Yeah, set a fire.
Yeah, but,
There's nowhere to go with the subject.
Sorry.
That's another quarter acre. The store, where the store is, or used to be.
Yep.
There's
Cafe
no-
Soul?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
so?
even though it might not be
No.
buildable, it's pre-existing non-conforming as long
Yeah,
as there's
it's
something there.
pre-existing.
So
Right, but if
it's still be built.
like, if that's where the store is, the store would be a 3,
Right,
because there's something on it, even though that technically today it's not buildable.
right.
It used, or was the Cafe Soul.
Right.
So you'd have, so let me just throw this out there again. So on the unit charges, you'd have meter buildable 3, no meter buildable 1, no meter not buildable 0 for the unit charge. What do you do about the tax levy? I don't think we have an option on that, but let's say the property that has no meter and it's not buildable, they're not assessed $187, but they're still in the district. I think we still have to assess them the tax levy. It's small.
Right.
I think you should because there's still.
Because
fire
honestly,
protection.
It's gonna be a
Regardless of
quarter
what-
acre lot is, any of those are gonna, you're talking 10, 10 or 20,000 dollars and set whatever the assessed value might be, and you're talking 69 cents, you're talking less than $20.
But how many of those are your new proposed 0? I mean, isn't that gonna screw this up for
I need
everybody
to run
else?
I need
Yeah,
to.
we need to
mean,
figure it out and
that's-
see.
I don't know, I mean, did they agree to it when it was initially put in there? I mean, even though it was not buildable and a 0, I don't know if that's fair to the other residents to all of a sudden take them out of the equation. Just because, I mean, they're still in the district and it's currently not buildable. Maybe tomorrow your board thinks 1/8 of an acre lots are the best thing ever for your zoning, I mean.
Then it becomes a 1
And,
or a 3.
and I think you're gonna have people fighting whether or not things are buildable, you know what I mean? That opens a
That's
whole,
true, that's what would happen.
Yeah.
We'll go from 0 to, you know.
a 3.
But I think it depends on the number. If we're talking 3 or 4, I mean, you guys, you're kind of racking your brains thinking, and there's a small handful.
Yeah.
It might be 4 or 5. Do you think there's more than that? I mean, if it's only a couple.
But it also, I think it opens the door for anybody to come in and be like, well, my lot's not buildable, it's got a great big hill on it, we can't build it, you know what, I mean, I don't know.
But it
It's
was
based on per
Yeah.
code.
But they're still being taxed for being in the district.
Yeah, they're.
They're just not getting the
They're
unit
just not
charge.
paying the unit charge for the
But
water.
them coming out of the units impacts everybody else who is part of the units.
Because the units is directly tied to the debt.
Yeah.
For the creation of the district.
Where's it gonna show up? In the 3rd decimal point or so?
Right.
I mean, it's not. If they're quarter acre lots, it can't be assessed to that. You're not really, you're gonna see it, but it is gonna be a.
Well, you haven't seen the assessments.
But that's what I'm saying, how many are we talking about too, but I
Yeah,
just,
it might-
it's
I mean,
not very clean.
We might be
so,
spinning
you
our
know.
wheels about an issue that might not really be huge. That. I'd be interested,
It's not as clean as you're in the district, you're not in the district. You're in the district with a house, you pay this much. You're in the district with vacant land, you pay this much. That's a lot cleaner than, is it buildable, is it not buildable, is it, I just,
it'd have to be buildable by acreage.
Like, I don't.
Based on the number of
I
whatever.
agree with Ellen's saying, but the pressure from the residents in Bristol goes on the assessor like every year, seems like this all about, they don't agree and they want an answer of why they should be 1 or a 3. I think that's what we're trying to decide or not decide.
I think this clarifies the 1 and 3. The 1 and 3 clarifies it
I
pretty
think the
well.
water meter issue clarifies your one.
If you've got a water meter, that kind of
That makes sense.
fixes it right there.
And just so everybody's clear on that, like, because I know I've heard a story about, so again, somebody has a water meter because they have water to the shed because of the horses, they're gonna get charged at 3, even though there's no house on it, right? Okay.
Yep.
But
If they're using water.
They're using water.
Right.
Right.
If they're using water,
Yeah,
they're
they
a
do.
3. If they're not using water, they're a 1. I don't think 0 makes a lot of sense just because of the quality of the lot.
So.
Another concern is the number of apartments, or if we could address that.
Yeah. That's of more concern to me if
Yeah.
they're, you know,
And that's another area that might offset some of the other smaller ones, if you were to make that, if we were to go forward with that change, if you can add those apartments. If there are multi-units that are using a large amount of water, they might offset some of the other changes.
Let us run some numbers and also
It
look
all
at some
depends, yeah.
wording and we, any thoughts to the out of district users? That's probably.
I think. What did you say, Terry? Basically, you're adding 2 units, so they're basically getting almost a
It's the
$400
census.
charge.
5 and a 3 is what.
They get a $400 charge, basically, extra annual charge for being an out of district user. I think that's,
But they're not paying tax.
Well,
No, they are.
They're gonna pay the interest principal,
Okay.
O and M,
so
plus
they'll,
an administration fee
Yeah.
for having to do this additional work.
so the formula would be something like
You know, I mean,
your assessed, your charge will be based on your assessed value, the formula that Jim uses.
Okay.
So if you come in as an out of district user and you're assessed at 200,000, you'd pay a fee based on that 200,000 distributed quarterly for your O and M contribution. Plus, you'd have an annual out of district charge. So if you were a developed home, you instead of being a 3, you'd pay a 5. So you
Something
would
to that
pay
effect.
5 units of the 187. 3, which you would normally pay if you were in district, and 2 additional for your out of district fee.
right,
I think that's the most fair.
So it would just be 2 on top of whatever.
Whatever it is,
That makes
whatever you
sense.
are, so stick with the
Plus
formula,
2,
and
yeah.
whatever you are, 2 units on top. And that kind of,
That's a 5.
yeah.
Out of district.
I don't know, if-
Either a
I don't know if
3
we,
or 5.
I don't think we call it 5.
we probably can't
But
say.
we should just
the
say the fee is this.
Plus 2.
And it can be reviewed annually and maybe something can change.
Can we say it's the equivalent of 2 unit charges?
But again, we have to go back because that does change. I don't know, changes every year, but
But
does
you know what I'm
change
saying?
some.
So let's say in 5 years,
Right, so just whatever, it's not, don't put an amount,
There's
just
no
whatever.
It's not
yeah,
about
don't put a
units.
dollar amount, just say your out of,
Just say,
your out
yeah.
of user fee is the equivalent of 2
Right,
of the annual unit
Charges.
charges.
correct.
Yeah,
Are we encouraging additional people to be added in out of district or?
No, actually, we,
Right.
I
I'm just wondering.
spent 3 years, I met with these neighbors and they just didn't want, no for an answer. And the only way to do it was to, as a town of Bristol, write a resolution saying, yep, you're an out-of-district user, you're gonna get charged this, and it's gonna be on your water bill and.
So this is not gonna be an option to, you know, I know you said this house was just off it. We're not gonna be saying, hey, if you
Yeah,
pay
we
X
don't-
amount, you can
If
come in as well.
anything was made crystal clear, the residents were there. You are responsible. The agreement they signed, you are responsible for all implications, all billing, everything. That was made crystal clear. Jim took the time for each place. It was started out, there was actually 3.
There was 3.
considered. Then the third one dropped off. I went from, and I'm kind of grasping for numbers here, but first one was gonna be $8,000 to get it installed. That's-
Right.
Then the next one was in the,
Say 45, $6 range.
it was a little bit more, yeah, it kept increasing with each
Mhm.
place. Like I said, I couldn't have made it any clearer because I didn't want it coming back, whether I'm the town supervisor, whether these board members are there, or the next board that sits in the next supervisor. It's in the minutes and it was crystal clear.
And each one has its own meter pit. It's in our easement. So after that meter pit, it's all theirs.
so this again is probably will be a very rare,
Yes.
probably a very rare occurrence.
Mhm.
Unless there's somebody who really, really wants it. And it would be pricey.
Yes.
And they also
Very
understand
expensive.
that if the district goes down 32, they're gonna have to pay the next one that goes past their house.
Right.
So,
Can I back up for just, so it's clear in my mind? Per unit is $187 a year, correct?
yes,
Yeah, this year.
So I think I'm a 3.
yep, you're a 3.
So that comes to 3. Okay, almost 600.
561 for 3.
And the people that you're charging out of district will be considered
5.
5, so they pay 5
935.
times at 187.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
And they'll
935.
be billed quarterly.
Quarterly. Yep. Under one of them.
Those unit charges are every quarter.
Every quarter we'll
Okay.
charge those. That's how we
Well, it's
do
an annual
the bill
fee.
For the out of district.
It's an annual fee.
It's an annual
charged
fee
quarterly.
charged
Okay.
Yes,
quarterly,
yeah,
yeah.
annual
That's
fee
okay.
charged quarterly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, if that was quarterly, that'd be
Yeah, that's,
really
that's
good
pretty
water.
expensive.
That is premium stuff.
It's the
Not
special
a THM.
low
Yeah.
THM free water.
Reverse osmosis water.
Oh,
Piped in from
we'll put it on
the
film.
Let's see. So we, do we, I don't know, do we want to broach, Doug, we had talked earlier about water at different places. Do we want to broach that or we call it good? Supervisor, you'd mentioned discussing water to the top of this place with cabins.
Yeah.
And that's why we have Mr. Tim Davis on here.
We're talking about Ontario County Park. I think it's.
Tim's got all the money.
All right, so we'll call it good. Thank you for doing it.
Tim, I'll lead into this, I'll lay the groundwork. And then we can step in, okay? In some substance, the 4-H camp for years has a water problem. And folks that live in the hills, on the hills, they're just places you cannot get good water. Sinking a hole in the ground does not guarantee water. When the 4-H camp was originally built back in the 1960s or late 50s, it's incorrect for that. There was a small group of.
You're muted.
He's not muted, he's just can't hear.
No, or you're quiet. I didn't hear you.
Can be, there was a small group and it kept growing over the years and over the years. And the 4-H camp now is challenged with meeting the water needs of that camp. The Department of Health steps in there. Again, I'm going to defer a lot of this to Tim. But the Department of Health has certain recommendations that have to be followed. This last year, the 2 fire departments, Cheshire and Bristol, spent how many days, Lauren?
Oh, gosh. Weeks, yeah. Well, they had to do it twice,
They
so.
do it twice. A number of water relays from fire hydrants to fill the pool. And I cannot say enough goodness for the fire department for doing that. I do believe Cheshire helped you with that. didn't they?
Yes, they did.
Cheshire helped. So,
And we had permission.
Yes, we were flushing hydrants, we
Yeah.
needed water for the pools, so take it there.
Perfect.
but that type of a setup cannot continue. They need water. This camp caters to not only just campers come back every year, but they cater also to individuals who have developmental needs, special needs. And to them, I take my hat off to them. My daughter worked with children of special needs. This camp, and then one more time, I defer to Tim, is now grown to the level they cannot meet their water demands, especially the water demands that are demanded by the Department of Health. That being said, Tim, defer to you now, sir.
I think you explained it well, Bob, that our program has not only grown. When I came in 1998, we had 374 campers for the summer. At our peak, just prior to the pandemic, we were over 1,100 campers for the summer. That did not include our summer groups like music camp, like Camp Getaway, which is a youth mental health camp rental group that we work with, or even the Canandaigua sixth grades nights at our facility. So certainly the usage has increased tremendously, as we have worked hard to make sure we're not only making the facilities safe, attractive, and affordable for our own summer camp residents, but also for other community groups that want to be able to use the facilities. I think that, coupled with what we are hearing, is the drop of the water table and the need for additional water by adding in new bathrooms, which were critically needed. Our bathrooms were way, way, way out of use, past their useful life. There's just been an increased need for water that we're not able to meet with our current well. So we are interested in pursuing the possibility of public water at camp. Our board understands the need for the water and have approved funding to be able to do the preliminary engineering report to see what would be involved in bringing public water to camp.
We lost him.
No.
No, I just stopped.
Just stop talking. Finished his thought.
The camp's on Kear Road, correct?
Correct.
Is, yes.
So
It's like-
the reality is they need water.
So we need to, in theory, go up good. Would we be able to go up Goodale to Kier?
Oh, we already have water on.
We have water on
Goodale.
Goodale. Can we just take it up to Kier, or is that too high?
No, it can get there
Going
by
past-
gravity.
How far is it?
It's 3,300 feet, I believe. Okay.
Yeah, I can jump in here real quick. So yeah, it's about a 3,900 foot extension of water. The grade level at the camp is such that it could be served by existing infrastructure. But I think one of the alternatives that we wanted to look at is potentially if there's a way to site a tank, possibly in along that could get that Canandaigua-Bristol district to operate as a more conventional water system versus the pressure demand system. Again, I apologize if I jumped ahead, but I'm on a phone. Sorry.
So
Any questions on that?
So now on the table is, everything was clear.
Let's go run water.
Let's do it tomorrow. Gonna start digging.
But we've already said that you can't, that expanding the district
So,
is untenable.
no, it's not untenable. What it is you can expand a water district. Just matter how much you have the money to pay for it. And hopefully that this section will be majority paid for by, let's say, people who represent us in New York State or the federal government to get money to pay for this to this camp is the goal. Not put the burden solely on a few houses in the lot.
So I think, let's throw out some numbers. I think, Greg, Jim, you came up with a number of $250,000 approximately.
To get water.
I think it was around, by town, like 380,000.
So what's that? What's that
It's
380
about
for?
$100 a foot.
That's just to run a line.
Well, that should help include your engineering. The one unknown right now is the stream crossing. We'll have to deal with what they're going to require here.
But Greg had mentioned a tank. Is that ahead?
So
And then he
there's a
apologized for
tank.
getting ahead of the game.
Yeah, what was all those tabs?
So I think there's the direct line, but there's a larger picture we also need to think of.
Go back to
Yeah.
that one. So
So the proposed Smith Road tank, that is on Smith Road. That's
Okay, just so town board, this is part of the water master plan. So this is an adopted plan.
Right.
this tank here would eliminate the day road tank because this is higher than the day road tank itself. It would provide less pumping of the water over to Bristol and provide a larger storage for Bristol for the future. It will also be a lot easier to have than a bunch of pumps running 24/7 to get the water over there. It'd be a cost savings over time for the district to remove the tank from Day Road to here.
Is that shown on camp property?
What was that?
Whose property is that?
That is on the Bristol Hills. It used to be, I'll talk about Dave. It was the Brewer Farm. Okay, and we've spoken to Brewer and she sold to the next owner. She's not opposed to the tank up there because she would like water too, because she can't get to her house. So that this is a location that has potential to serve a larger area, not just for Bristol, but for Canandaigua also. That's where that proposed Smith Road tank comes into play.
So with that, what would be the benefit to our current issue with our THMs and all of those other issues we are seeing right now?
Well, we would then have the age of water would not be as old as it would be stored sooner in this tank. And then with all hopes, the red dotted line would then connect back to 21 to loop the system to the south.
So then we have a loop, so we're not sitting in any dead ends.
Right.
Oh, you continue it all the way down, Lucas? if you were doing it?
Lucas, no, because I think you might start to run into an elevation issue about 3/4 of the way down. It's going to be similar height of the tank, but you could get it down, let's say Seneca Point Road, 21 South. You could then backfeed Coy Road, County Road 16. Those are areas that don't have water, who many people are interested in water. There's one here tonight. He would love water on Seneca Point Road. So that tank would feed south. You would have two zones.
This is zone 2, this is zone 1.
The tanks on Kramer Road are not high enough to feed zone 2 without pumping it uphill. So the pumps in Bristol or in Cheshire would fill that tank. That tank then would go to Bristol and south of Cheshire.
And all that for, what do you say, $370,000?
Yes.
That's pretty amazing.
That's amazing.
Say, take the Day Road tank and put it up here or replace that.
Correct.
And how does that help with camp?
Well, the elevation helps for one, for camp. But in the broader scheme of things here is, if we're going to make improvements to one district, we're trying to look at a large improvement to the entire district and go after some large money to make that happen.
How big is that tank gonna be?
Greg, Mr. Hotelling?
Yeah. It would probably be in something in between the new tanks and that old tank. So I mean, it's probably maybe 200,000 at most.
Okay.
So you're saying in between the
Current Day
Kramer
Road tank is
Day Road
125,000.
tank? Okay.
Can you point where Day Road is? I'm not.
Day Road,
It's not on this side, it's west.
Oh,
It's up. Is it
Go
up
back to
now?
your,
past 64?
our district.
It's going down the hill. It's a 32 and 64 at the intersection, right?
Yeah, that's right.
There's where
That's one. That's also a little higher.
Okay.
So the $380,000 your 200,000 gallon. tank.
No, that's just to run the water main.
I mean,
So
we
just-
paid millions for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
That's
What the
just
heck,
to run
man?
like 3,800 feet of water.
13 million.
So to add the aerators to the day road tank, we're looking at $250,000
Correct.
to help try to resolve that problem. To just run straight water to Bristol, to the camp, we're looking at 400,000.
I'll just, round it up.
Do you guys have any? ARPA
This
left?
would be much more than that, but it would provide a benefit to a lot more people.
Correct.
And it would help fix one problem rather than throwing $250,000 at a problem to fix it temporarily. And then another 400,000 to get water here, which is $750,000.
Right.
We can still have to run the line though.
Right,
Start with the line.
right, yeah,
I think what you're trying to say is maybe.
rather than
look
throwing money
At
at
day
these
road
different
tank, if we
issues,
put this tank.
maybe we can fix this issue. And we are also saying for us in the town, Pierce would go away, right? Pierce pump station,
No, there's pump station would stay.
and it would pump it up.
Pump up to the tank, the small Goodell Road station would go away.
Okay.
Is that where the elevation is?
When you say elevation, like,
When you say, to get it to Day Road, we gotta pump it up.
we would pump it from here
That's
to
all.
here, to here, go gravity.
That's big time uphill.
So that Goodell pump station goes away.
Yeah, so then,
The small Goodell Road goes away. That's the small Jackie
That one
pumps.
that,
The one that's labeled Good Dale Pump
Yeah,
Station.
one to the right stays.
yeah.
Pierce Park stays, but not.
Correct.
But you're looking at probably a couple $1,000,000. At least 200,000 gallon tank,
That's where it is.
so,
at least.
yes,
Right, so are we 300,000 or 2 million?
$3.5 million, probably take care of all.
but the point is, the minute,
Yeah, for weed grants.
Million.
yeah, the point is, the minute we bring in the 4-H camp, we open up a lot more doors as well. We open a lot more funding. We open a lot more need. We open a lot more interest in that, an opportunity.
I think it was mentioned earlier about bringing state offices in.
Right.
Senator Helming in, now it's gonna be Assembly Lady.
Margie Burns.
Margie
Margie Burns.
Yeah, that's what she is.
Really being.
They'd be all over this.
Yeah,
They would be very supportive of getting as much, and even federal money as well.
The other thing too, and Doug and I and Karen, we were on a conversation earlier about pulling the county in on some of this, because that camp does help facilitate county residents. The school districts, those notices go out to all the school districts, and we bring in children from those. Would it be possible to bring some funding in? But I think the largest pool of resource here is state and federal funding, and I think they would jump on that.
Is that map is going down Kier Road to that water tank, that red line that you're showing there?
No, we're, Kier Road is to the west.
Oh, okay, got it. Yes, sir.
So if we could break this apart for a second, so the 4-H camp, right, the $400,000 plus or minus, that line would have to happen, if you're gonna do it, would have to happen regardless of this. This is gonna help, but that's still gonna have to happen, right? So talking about that for a second, so as you said, there's all kinds of different state partners, federal partners that maybe might help with that. There is an opportunity, but the window is closing very quickly. I want to just make you aware of. There is a new program, Restore New York, that is specifically for, the parameters have come out just recently, round 7, Restore New York. And specifically, there's state funding available to municipalities for projects that include essentially, I'm going to disadvantaged communities, stabilizing neighborhoods, improvements for overall community improvement.
Is that what the Y got for 2 million?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about
$2 million.
But this specifically, it may be a previous round. This round, the applications are due the end of January. So the window, like I said, is closing, but there is a required letter of intent that has to be filed by this Wednesday.
And one of the advantages to doing something like this, as opposed to creating a new district extension, right? Because if we create a new district extension, there's going to be debt service and everything else. And then the residents of that district are going to have to pay for it, right? And that's where you get a lot of unknowns. If we get combination of the county, the 4-H camp, and a grant like the Restore New York to pay for it, it's essentially, we don't have to do a district extension. They're just funding the improvements. Because specifically the infrastructure is for improving a facility like, for instance, potentially the 4-H camp. We would have to file the letter, the town of Bristol would have to, I'd have to help you, but the town of Bristol would have to file the letter of intent by this Wednesday, close of business, to even make an application, to preserve the opportunity to make an application in January if you decide to do that, over and above the tank. But at least then it becomes a little bit more feasible to make up that $400,000 for that water line.
Jared, Doug, and I can sit down.
We can draft a letter that we can send out and sign.
I'm sure, and this doesn't commit us to anything, it's just.
Letter of intent.
Yep. So, you know, I'm getting some nods here.
You guys okay with, everybody okay with that?
Yep. I mean, going that route would be much, this other tank and all that, you're looking at a multi-year process.
But this other route is much more financially responsible, I think.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Then, yeah, that's what
Curing it for
owners
years
are
as opposed to
resident.
band-aiding.
So I assume there's people who live on Shore Road between the Dell and the 4-H camp.
Let's see.
There's like 4 or
There's
5.
properties there, certainly.
What are they built?
Ones and threes.
No,
Well,
their houses.
If the district was paid for, the district form of paid for, there's no debt to that. Right?
Yeah.
So they don't have the 1, 2, or 3. They
They
don't
don't
have
have
1
one,
or 3.
they'll just have O and M.
Yeah, they don't have that other
Because
agreement.
essentially that was paid for by a grant.
Yeah.
9 parcels.
I think the one right in the corner has water.
Was past it.
Is that the
I don't know if they would
You take there.
Well, we would probably go as far as beyond the pool. And I'm assuming I want to bring some right from the pool, from the water main. So to fill up as they need to.
I don't think they want to use garden hose, Jim.
No.
No.
Well, and there's 2 houses right there too, you might as well.
So that's something, you know, you may get, people say, well, bring it this far. Then you have to say, well, you have to pay for it.
Yeah. And if, you know, for example, there's a couple people that live right across from camp in addition to along the road. Can they tie in if they want?
Yes.
I mean, you could always make the argument they're all out of district users, right?
Correct.
And
That's
then
what I
they're
was
paying the
thinking,
additional, that's, we can wordsmith all
Yeah.
that, but to help the overall district.
That would seem a little more, I think.
Then you gotta figure out how many units the 4-H camp is.
There's gonna be.
Have fun with that one.
Peter,
We'll need a meter on every toilet.
But it's only got 1 meter.
Oh, we put a meter at
The
here,
pool
like,
is a
yeah,
unit,
meter.
each stall of the bathroom is a unit.
So it's 3.
Sure.
It's currently, it would be a 3, current regulations.
So you just have to write the letter of intent. You're not saying a figure.
We have to put some basic stuff in, real basic stuff, but just letter of intent. However, the applicant, which would either need to be Ontario County or the town of Bristol, I'm assuming the town of Bristol, will need to hold a public hearing prior to the grant application, which will be due at the end of January. So you would need town board meeting in January, 2 probably. Your organizational meeting, I'm assuming, plus a public hearing, 1 for a public hearing.
But we won't know. We may not need that if they say your letter of intent, forget it, we're not considering.
Right, if they reject it, then, right, correct. But if they say they would welcome the application, then, right.
I think at this point also would behoove,
Within a couple of weeks.
to behoove me to make a couple phone calls from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get that process and I'll let you.
Yeah, let me know.
Yeah, we can chat. Feel wonderful. 3 of us.
Good meeting.
All right, does anybody have any, I think we had some,
I just forewarn the Bristol Water District that the water rate is going up. And it's multiple things, electric, chemicals, labor, our source of water we purchase it from, so. You know, I have a file number, but it's gonna go up as long as everybody else is. So,
It's not gonna exceed the 2% tax.
it probably will. So,
Couldn't miss.
what's that?
that's the Auburn Trail and
Not
Universal.
much we could do about the cost of things right now, so.
Right, unicorns live all around.
You know, for example, the Canandaigua water plant was buy chlorine for 74 cents a gallon a couple of years ago. Now it's $4.75 a gallon. Just to chlorinate the same water. So, I mean,
When the city's rate that they charge all of us. that went up.
yes,
So
that's gone
it's-
up also. That went up 31%.
And that's gonna keep, that'll keep going up over the next few years as
Yeah.
well as they try to figure out their maintenance, their facility needs.
So,
All right, so
I just don't want it to be a surprise in January when you get your water bill, favor you get water.
I want to thank Jared and Doug for bringing us together. It's very important, particularly us, we don't deal with water districts. But we are part of that water district. And it's important, it's an educational process for us as boards to understand what's taking place and why to integrate all of this takes so much time, the effort, the paperwork, grants, bringing other stakeholders into the process here. I do want to thank the town.
thank you for coming.
Very informative. And I want to thank my own board too. Everybody came.
And we do have a comment. Tim, did you have a comment?
Supervisor Green, please reach out to me if you need anything for that letter of intent. I will not be back in the area until Sunday. But again, if you reach out to me, I'll make sure you get whatever it is that we need, for that. Otherwise, I do also want to express my appreciation. Cornell Cooperative Extension greatly appreciates the support, for considering bringing public water to 4-H camp. So thank you very much. It's greatly appreciated.
And you're absolutely right, Tim. I'll take the hit for that. I didn't mean to ignore you. We did not mean to ignore you, but your signature on there would be most appropriate. So-
Our deadline is Wednesday. It's like, as in after tomorrow, Wednesday.
All right, just checking.
36 hours away Wednesday.
The intent form is just a real simple one
Yeah,
pager.
it's a simple
It's-
letter.
yeah.
What's most important is stakeholder signatures.
And then a lot of that stuff, the letters of support would do that as part of the application.
Yeah, then I'll come in afterwards.
When do you hear whether they accept?
Usually a couple of weeks after, whether or not, if they,
Before-
you'll either get a rejection, don't bother applying, or
You can reach out to me.
Go ahead. Fill it out, send it
Right.
backstage.
Right.
You're cold, that's what they-
Coal.
They don't know what it's gonna be, what's that?
Santa will drop it down the
And I'll
chimney.
bring it up in our next public works too. Because it's something that might need to come up there too as well, to have a discussion about. some important things that we gotta help
We've got the capacity as supervisors to take this to public works.
Yeah, so if we get, yeah, so if we can get some extra impetus there, it might help push it forward a little bit.
Great.
All right, it is 7:23, and I did promise my wife I'd be home by 7:30.
Well, it's 5 minutes late, don't speak.
It's 7. What?
He's close.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I promised her that I would be home central time, so. Motion to adjourn,
Second.
moving second, all in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned, thank you, everyone.
Yeah.